Well, welcome to this conversation on Messiah, the new series from Netflix. I have to say there's going to be some spoilers, so if you haven't seen the last episodes, turn away now and come back when you've finished. I'm delighted to have Miriam here, Executive Director of the Woolf Institute. Miriam, what did you think of the film?
Well, I went into it having done some research before, and I looked at Rotten Tomatoes, and at Rotten Tomatoes it had an audience score of 90, so the audience really loved it, but the critics at that time it had a 38 score.
It's up to 40, I looked at it today.
Yeah, so again, this great discrepancy between what the critics like and what the audience like. That was one of the things that actually thought I have to watch this, because I thought that there would be sort of some nice tensions there. And then having watched it, I was absolutely mesmerized. It really drew me in from the first episode. And I loved the different layers, I loved the complexity, I loved how on one hand it was actually, the story of basically Jesus retold in modern times with all its factors, with the social reformer coming up, the miracles, pretty much the same stages being described, the prostitute, the encounter with the prostitute, of walking on the water, the reviving of people. But on the other hand, it was also such a modern story. It's about climate change, it's about eschatology, the end of the world. All these quite complex theological and cultural discussions put together in one series that really polarizes audiences. I found it absolutely fascinating.
So our work, of course, is about studying the encounter and understanding what happens when people, ideas, concepts meet, and this series does all of that, doesn't it?
Well, it has Israel-Palestine, it has the ideas of, what do you actually do? What would you do if the Messiah comes?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Let's begin with that question. What happens when somebody turns up and not only claims to be the Messiah, because there are such things as the Jerusalem syndrome and other syndromes, but performs these miracles in downtown Washington DC or in Israel or on the border with Syria and Palestine?
Yeah.
What actually takes place?
Well, what I really liked on the show is that from the very beginning, you are sort of left in the position of the doubter, right?
Yes.
They never quite show you the miracle, for example, of him walking on the water. You see it through the reactions, or you see him sort of from the far, but you don't really see a close-up of the water. You experience it through the reactions.
Let's take it to you and us. What would you do if somebody turned up here in the heart of Cambridge and performed these miracles? What impact would it have?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, because I asked that myself, and I think I met one of the people in one of the classroom scenes at the university, and he said, I'm actually afraid it is the real thing, because that means we have to change something, that means we have to react to it, that means that things are gonna be different. I think I would be one of those people, and we had a short discussion over this when we first discussed it. We had both watched this, and I remember you were quite appalled that I would not immediately follow this person, even if I know it was the Son of God. I would actually sort of say, okay, you're the Son of God, and what's happening now?
Well, it's very rabbinic, isn't it? Because the rabbis say in the Talmud, if the Messiah comes and you're planting a tree, you must finish planting the tree.
Yeah, no, I would finish planting the tree.
You must finish planting the tree. See, I felt a real sympathy with the pastor in the States. It was a primitive reaction to somebody who wanted guidance, who wanted to believe, and he decided to change his life, and I could really relate to that on a personal level. It wasn't so much his wife, who seemed to be the sort of stereotypical alcoholic, spurned spouse. And it wasn't his daughter, who I liked, but she had epilepsy, didn't she? And but it wasn't because he was a man, it was because he was this leader and he was struggling with his own demons about to burn down the church. And then this figure appears, the church survives, and he has to make this decision. Do I follow this person and give up everything? Or do I just serve my community? And of course he's been born, trained to serve the community, but he gave everything up. And I really related to that, not because necessarily I would give everything up, but I thought this sort of primitive simplicity of what to do. It was existential, and then he followed. Yeah. And I felt such a lot of sympathy for him, but I know people who didn't.
Yeah, but he's such a tragic figure. I mean, the whole family is so interesting because obviously the wife, is a daughter of this very, very famous evangelical preacher who then marries a small town pastor. So, I mean, with the complexity that comes with that, obviously she's not very happy in that small town. He isn't very happy, but again, they need this miracle to change their lives. And the daughter, I find the daughter also very interesting in the same way that Jibril is interesting, that the Messiah basically around him has these sort of saint-like, apostle-like figures sprouting who come into their own through the encounter with him.
Did you feel Jibril? I felt Jibril was like Peter, actually. So I was looking at it from a New Testament perspective. You know, he was a flawed character, as Peter was a flawed character according to the New Testament accounts. You know, but upon this rock I will build my church, as it were. This is Peter. And I just wondered whether Jibril would become that person, because he was true. He remained steadfast even under this awful situation.
And this brilliant sort of idea that he has, like this thing that comes over him, that he sheds his clothes and then walks naked at the gun. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant also from a purely sort of psychological effect. Of course, if you're naked, they will not shoot you because there is no danger that comes from sort of the shock effect of the naked body.
But also the vulnerability.
But he's vulnerable, but he also then emerges as a quasi-religious figure because he is sort of drawn to this by forces that he probably doesn't quite understand.
That's right, and this religious aspect is so interesting because, who is Al-Masih? I mean, was it a Jewish father or a Jewish mother?
It's a Jewish father and a Christian mother.
That's right, so we've got already this mixed heritage, as it were, and then this person who's bringing these Syrian Palestinians to the border with Israel. So you assume perhaps he's going to be Muslim. That's the assumption.
Yes.
And then
and that's really interesting. There are all these discussions on the internet surrounding Al-Masih's real identity. And very interestingly, there was this massive discussion that came up calling him the Antichrist. And it was mainly people who are Arabic speakers from a Muslim background. And I said, surely Al-Masih is actually the Antichrist in Arabic. And, Netflix has it all wrong. I mean, they obviously gave it all away by using this name in Arabic, when Arabic speakers clearly know he must be the Antichrist. And that's really, really interesting, because that sort of presumes that Arabic speakers are Muslim only. But there are a lot of Arabic speakers who are Christians and Jews, and for them, Al-Masih means Messiah.
Absolutely.
So there was this discussion that was basically caused by actually just one side of the Abrahamic faith claiming that their linguistic reality was the reality of this, and that he's the Antichrist. And actually then there were all these ideas that Jibril is the real Messiah, when Jibril has a name of an archangel, right? It's an archangel name. He's not the Messiah. Obviously these are figures around, sort of religious figures around the Messiah. Yes. But to presume, again, in sort of this anticipation of a twist that he must be the Antichrist. I thought that was very, very interesting.
I never saw it until I saw these rumours and then you told me about them. I never saw an Antichrist element. For me, the question was Al-Masih the Messiah, or was he a magician? Was he a deceiver? And he performs these little tricks, even the walking on water. For me personally, somebody walks on water, that's not enough.
Yes.
And it's the knowledge, for example, of Aviram's history when he was in that interrogation, that he knew that something has happened. Yeah. I think also the knowledge of Eva.
But that knowledge, especially that no one knew.
That's right. The same with Eva, the CIA woman, who was a bit of a stereotype actually. Yeah. But no, the knowledge of her and her family and her background. And so even the escape out of the prison in Israel, and then escape from the prison in the States, all of that to me was beyond any magical tricks. But what I was struggling with, whether he was a magician or was he the Messiah. Yeah. And even until the sort of near the end, and I'm sorry about this, particularly Tara, who's filming it because she hasn't seen the last episode. Yeah. So, but even at the end, it was so depressing, wasn't it? The last episode or two was
when everyone loses faith.
Everything is just depressing. And I thought, this cannot be. Now, it wasn't the ending I expected. Yeah. The ending I expected was him as the messenger of peace. I suppose I'm giving my kind of Jewish-Christian relations slant on it. I expected almost to bring peace between Israel and Palestine or something, because it was becoming so awful.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed by the ending.
Really?
Because it was too easy to turn him into this Christ-like figure. Because we just didn't know, and I just felt everything has been quite sophisticated up until then, that it raised questions. It wasn't simplified. The end was, to me, far too simple.
But the fact that he lands in this beautiful landscape of red flowers, which you don't know whether that there was red flowers have there been before, or whether it's the impact that makes these flowers sprout. And the thing is, they've done again the whole time they sort of the makers of the series, they let you down. They always sow these doubts. They show you the magician background, even though you feel instinctively, especially for example when it comes to the prostitute who says, it doesn't matter whether he's the Messiah or not, he's a good person. The most moving part of the series for me was the scene with the prostitute, where he says, she should love herself, God loves her, he loves her, and all this, while he has actually this conversation with the prostitute, he basically makes the FBI agent a convert through this, because the FBI agent feels he's actually speaking to him through that medium, and that was such a powerful scene. But the whole time, there's always this doubt being sown by the CIA agent, by the whole magician background, and even in the end scene, the person who tells Avi that this is the Messiah who revived him has obviously just before been described as the biggest liar.
I know, but it's a bit simple, isn't it? I mean, this child who appears in class, Malik's his name, isn't it? And then he's told, people, this fellow pupils say that, he's a storyteller, and then this plane appears, and this person who resurrects the dead appears. I suppose I just felt that was a bit too simple. Maybe it was just a vision that...
Well, again, I think it was to keep us doubting, because at the same time, I find myself really rooting for the Messiah, and I want him to be taken seriously, because with all his sort of complexity, he is a very, very sympathetic character, and he's a bit prickly still. I mean, the way he shoots the dog rather than resurrecting it, the way that he constantly defies expectation, and the way he's sort of a little bit like a psychotherapist. He, instead of sort of giving out knowledge, he actually just asks questions. What do you think which I should do? Where do you think?
Well, he's a good teacher. I mean, that's what that's what we like, isn't it? In a person that he or she's asking these questions and making his interlocutor think about things.
Yeah.
I mean, I quite wanted the Messiah to be more of a flawed character.
Yeah.
And there were elements of his being flawed, but they were in the background. The meeting his brother and finding more about his family history. That he was in hospital for a while with Messiah syndrome.
Well, but of course, I mean, the Messiah would have Messiah complex,
exactly,
obviously, right?
Why wouldn't they? Exactly.
I mean, how else could you describe it?
But what does it say about the human condition? That this person appears and the world is transfixed, and it very cleverly played with the technology and the way that the daughter was constantly tweeting about what's happening and photographing what's happening, and suddenly from a few thousand followers to tens of millions of followers, and so it combined very nicely the sort of contemporary and the ancient. But I think for me what it told us about the human condition is that we are always looking for meaning. Yes. Some kind of purpose, whether it's a religious purpose like the pastor, or whether it's a national purpose like the CIA officer or Avi trying to, the security purpose, whether it's the mullah who actually pushed the button that blew up the explosive in the mosque. That that we're these flawed individuals, and I thought that for me was what I took away with it. I wanted to believe in him. I wasn't sure whether I could, but it was that real struggle that we have about who we are, what we do, and why we do it.
Yes, and I mean, for me, the most interesting thing was again exploring how I would react to a Messiah. And I mean, I've talked about this previously, but what I found really interesting is hearing other people talk about it. So I went from the University Library here in Cambridge. I walked to the Woolf Institute, and I was just, by chance, someone walking before me was talking about it, and she was talking about the series, and all she was talking about was the border issue, sort of this abolishing of borders, how borders are meeting this. So very different groups of people take out very different things. You took a lot of the faith aspects, other people take the political aspects, the social reform, which is something so at the core of everything that we have at the moment. The climate change came in, the urgent need for social reform, which basically, there's this religious figure that offers a socialist, communist social revolution, and is immediately labelled a terrorist by the CIA and by the State Department.
Yes, they don't know what to do with it, exactly. And I thought that was clever that on the one hand it was a Christian figure, or I should say a Christ-like figure, but he was never identified as Christian, was he?
Absolutely.
So the people around him were religious. I don't think there were any religious Jews, but you had religious Christians.
They were sitting in the audiences.
Religious Muslims. Yeah. They didn't actually have a role.
Yes. They didn't have a role.
What do you think about the interaction from the religious point of view? Because at the beginning we thought Al-Masih was Muslim, right?
Yeah.
Because he was leading a group of Muslims and he led them to the border and then disappeared. And you maybe got a sense that this was not just an unusual person because what he was doing, but the name Masih, for those of would know that there's something going on there. But do you think he was a Christian or a Muslim or possibly a Jew?
Well, I think he's quite purposefully someone who wants to bring together all the Abrahamic faiths. Because Jibril, again, in the mosque, when they want him to preach about an independent state of Palestine, what he says is that we're all one people. We're all, he sort of has a very, very reconciliatory interface message. And similarly, the daughter of the pastor, when she talks about him, she talks about Al-Masih, and there's very little Christian terminology in that language. It's really, again, a sort of all-encompassing Abrahamic vision that is being sold there.
You're right in terms of the language, that it wasn't Christian. The behaviour was very Christ-like. The walking on the water, the story of the prostitutes.
That was basically a repetition of a lot of the miracles that Jesus performed.
That's right.
But at the same time, there are some Muhammad qualities in him, because Muhammad, of course, thought that he was the person who brought all the Abrahamic faiths together. I mean, in the way that his religion was basically the culmination of Christianity and Judaism. So in a way, he had some qualities of the prophet as well.
But yet, some of the Muslim characters who rejected him because he was deemed as a heretic.
Yes.
In what way was he heretical? Was it his teaching that made him heretical?
I don't think it's a teaching as such. I think it's more that he was seen as a Christian figure.
Yes, maybe maybe challenging the authority.
Yes.
They never developed the Christian side beyond the very local pastor and the local evangelical church. You didn't get into the sort of structures of the institutions. Yeah. There was no Catholic dimension. There was no papacy.
No.
I mean, that would be
interesting.
And
also the Jewish dimension was missing. That basically the Messiah bringing about.
Yes, there wasn't much. There was a little bit. I think Eva at one point, and she's Jewish. I'm sure of that.
She's half Jewish. I think. Again, in one of the conversations, it appears that he says, like you, it's the father's line that's Jewish, but not the mother. Oh. So it appears that she's not halachically Jewish, but has a Jewish father.
Because she went to a grave at one point and put a stone on the grave, which is a very Jewish custom. And I think the gravestone actually had the Star of David.
Yes.
So there was a little bit.
And the father, obviously,
the father was Jewish.
And she's
I think at one point, a couple of Haredi or ultra-Orthodox rabbis appeared in a shot. It was almost as if they were put in afterwards.
Yeah.
But there wasn't much.
There was no theology.
Except that there wasn't much Jewish theology. Of course, Israel came into it, and that was more sort of the issue of land, state, and
but this was much more political.
Much more political, that's right. Much more national.
But again, I mean, you can imagine that they didn't want to, to make it even more fraud than it already was.
Well, it was very controversial.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a controversial effort by Netflix, which I think I have to say I would commend them for. It was brave. Take on a subject like the Messiah, to take on it in that sort of way in the southern parts of the States, bringing in Israel-Palestine, and having the sort of the homeland element, the series Homeland with destruction and mayhem and so on. I thought that was quite brave. I assume there will be a son of Messiah or a Messiah too. What do you think?
Well, the second series has been commissioned.
Has it?
Yes, so we will learn more, hopefully next year or maybe the year after.
So let's have a few predictions as we bring this conversation to a close. What's going to happen, say, Jibril we assume survives, right?
Yes. And there are some elements there that he can also perform miracles, because he clutches the hand of the CIA agent next to him, who seems to be dead.
Yes.
And then we don't know, maybe he revives him.
Maybe.
It's entirely possible, because he holds that hand quite tightly.
Yes, I saw that, yes.
And then of course the epileptic fit that came at the end of the speech of the pastor's daughter, and then the role that she's to play in the future.
And I think also Aviram as well. If he is alive, if this is not a vision, then he presumably becomes a follower of some kind, because the prediction Al-Masih made is that the last thing you're going to think about before you die is this boy you killed.
Yes,
and now
and then he apologizes while the plane sinks down.
That's right. I'm not sure what's going to happen to the...
I don't think he can be the Antichrist with those beautiful red flowers. It cannot be the Antichrist.
I thought so, that beautiful face. I think
no,
the handsome
flowers.
man.
It's the red flowers.
But I saw them as poppies. I didn't think them so
They are
much.
not poppies. No, I thought at first it was some sort of drug operation, but they are not poppies. They are some sort of desert flower that flowers when water flows in a wadi.
And I presume it was in Morocco or French North Africa, wasn't it? It wasn't because they were speaking French. So he's still some way from home. But you were happy with the ending, Miriam, were you?
I was very happy with the ending.
You?
I was very happy. And again, because it kept some of the ambiguity. But on the other hand, it really, the man survived a plane crash, unscathed. Even if he's not a Messiah, he's
impressive.
He's very impressive.
So what do we learn from it, from the perspective of the Woolf Institute, from the perspective of the encounter between religions, between religion and society? We're always saying, you and I, when we meet people, saying, yes, we study these ancient events or this ancient text or pre-modern text because they're as relevant today as they ever were. You don't just have to study the modern encounter between Jews, Christians and Muslims. And here we have the story of this 21st century figure who encapsulates many of the echoes, many of the customs, traditions, stories, particularly Christian stories, but not only. So what is it that our students and those connected with the Woolf Institute can take away from the series Messiah?
Well, I think what it really beautifully demonstrates is the connectedness of our modern world and our modern world's issue to faith. The fact that they have brought together issues that are so important for us, climate change, social injustice, and related them to faith. This deep need for people to believe, to find belief, to defy belief as well, both sides. The great cynicism that people have when it comes to faith, including myself. Again, this person reacting and saying, I hope he's not the Messiah, because that would be dreadful.
We were talking about the sort of apocalyptic dimensions of Messiah.
Yes. And this is really a feeling that a lot of people are feeling subconsciously because of climate change, because of the shortening of resources. We have a lot of apocalyptic and eschatological sort of visions coming again at the moment. Even we have even sort of come to the end of the alphabet when we name our generations, right? I'm Generation X, the millennials are Generation Y, and the newborns are Generation Z. We've reached the end of the alphabet. So somehow there is this feeling at the moment of deep insecurity, because our system, our economic system isn't working. The planet's being destroyed by how the world that we have developed. We have such great challenges in climate change, and again how all this relates to having faith in nature, having faith in each other, having faith in that this world can somehow be brought together by a figure that will provide us with a way to go forward.
Well, I think on that note, from A to Z, from Alpha to Omega, thank you very much.
Pleasure.